I was thinking of a clever thing to say, like, I am Joe, I have come to help you out of the ditch. But I won't say that.
No, don't say this.
Don't say that.
Over the ditch, over the ditch.
I know that. I know that. Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing now and give you an idea of what my life is like at this point. For the last eight years or so, especially for the last 5, I work in a mental hospital. It's an emergency psychiatric treatment center in Norristown, Pennsylvania. I'm an intake manager there at night. I work night shift, so my sleep patterns are all warped. And people were wondering if I got enough sleep, or I said it really doesn't matter. You know, I adjust as I go. What I do at the mental hospital is varied. We deal with people at their worst, when the police bring them in, when they wander in, they're on drugs, drunk, they've been suicidal, people that are depressed, and maybe you know the story if you've ever had an interaction with anyone who's had a mental problem or a chronic depression or whatever. So that's my day-to-day work life. My career, as David said, is an artist. I've been working in the art world since the late 1960s when I graduated from college with an art degree. I later went to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. The art world inadvertently led me into my spiritual journey. I began to look at the modern artists as my interest, my clue as to what art was about. And these were people in the late 19th century and the early 20th, from the post-impressionists through the symbolists and so on. Some of these people, Wassily Kandinsky, Franz Kupka, Piet Mondrian, William Butler Yeats the poet, all delved into something called theosophy at the time, especially the theosophical works of Madame Blavatsky and those people that followed in her footsteps. So I was alerted that there was something about this connection to the occult world and how to deal with it, and inspiration from on high that many of these artists were tapping into in order to get to where they were. I thought, well, I want a piece of that. You know, I'd like to find that out myself. And it took me a while to get to that point where I seriously began to pursue theosophy as a way of personal spiritual orientation, if you want to call it that. I wasn't looking to join groups. Okay. In 1975, I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico. If you've ever been there, it's one of the prominent seeker towns in the United States. I lived there for 18 years, and believe me, it gave me not only the rabbit hole that led to what I call the cult world of searches that I was in, and also the way out, and a career as an exit counselor, deprogrammer, cult specialist, or whatever you want to label me. I don't call myself a cult expert. That's a misnomer that sometimes the press uses because they like the word, but I never use it in my personal propaganda. What happened in Santa Fe was interesting, and I'll try to be as brief as possible about this because it's elaborate. I met a gentleman, a dear friend of mine, who passed away in 1987, but I met him in 1975, and he owned a little art gallery, like a mom and pop art gallery. A deaf Indian in New Mexico introduced me to him, who showed his artwork there. And his name was Bill Tate, and in his library he had lots of different books, interesting books. And one was Manly P. Hall's The Secret Teachings of All Ages. I don't know if any of you are aware of it. Yeah. I began reading it, and that's where I first really got intrigued with Blavatsky and her teachings, because he had a whole chapter on her, on Rosicrucianism, on all of that esoteric knowledge, on Freemasonry, and where that comes from, and how it hooks up with Rosicrucianism. And so, what inspired me about this was, okay, these people have certain techniques, they have certain meditations that they derive from Hinduism, Buddhism, and Western occult traditions. Maybe these artists were using these techniques, and maybe this is how they energize themselves to develop the personal styles of abstract expressionism or symbolism or whatever. So I thought, okay, I've got to find a group, find some teacher, find some way to get in there, and thus the journey started. About the same time, I got a job in Santa Fe, hired by this man who owned a large white adobe complex that was once inhabited by the I Am movement. And Edna Ballard had lived in the building. She was one of the founders of the movement. Guy Ballard had passed away by then. He died in 1939. But they had inhabited this, and after she died in the early 70s, it was sold to this gentleman that owned it. His mother, who lived in a building across the street from there, was an I-Ammer from the very early days, but quite isolated. She was close to 80 years old at the time. So I was hired to help remodel this place, and it was they were more than half done, and I walked into some of the rooms that hadn't been touched yet, that the I-Am had inhabited, and when you walk in, everything inside the room is painted pink, bright, glossy pink. Floor, radiators, everything, pure pink. One of the construction guys there, you know, beer drinking fellow, you know, he says it's like walking inside of a salmon. You know? You wonder what the hell was this about, you know. And then you look at the woodshed, and there were some of the old tools that the I Am members had who lived there. There were probably about 40 or 50 that lived in that one building. It was a large complex, and it was also their hub at the time. They did some production there of their materials that they disseminated, and the tools all had purple handles. You know, they all had purple handles for some reason. So I got curious, and I met with Walter's mother, who was the I-Ammer, and she was a sweet lady, simple, not well educated, but very dedicated to this path. Very, very dedicated. And so she would lend me books, and I would read them, and I subsequently read the whole literature, the I Am literature. He had it all, at least most of it. And another thing happened to me in 1975. I read an article in an art magazine about, it was a feature article about Nicholas Roerich. He was a painter, a Russian painter, died in 1947. He was born in Russia in 1874. Nicholas and his wife Helena began something called the Agni Yoga Society in 1921. They were theosophists. Helena had translated Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine into Russian. No mean feat. If you've ever read the Secret Doctrine, and I have, in its early editions it was almost impossible to read. It had to be edited many times to get to its present state where it's a little more readable. Has anyone here read the Secret Doctrine? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about, or books about it. So the Roerichs started the Agni Yoga Society, Agni meaning the god of fire, the god of spiritual inspiration from India, as an offshoot of Theosophy. And Helena was connected to Moria, Blavatsky's entity, one of the five that Blavatsky generally channeled, or was the amanuensis for, as she would call it. There was Saint Germain, there was Moria, there was Kuthumi, there was Dracul, and there was the Old Man of the Hills. Prior to those five, she used to channel someone called John King, and when she was younger, she would channel people's dead uncles and all kinds of that sort of thing, when she was more of a spiritualist. But getting back to Agni Yoga, what intrigued me about that group was that Roerich was a recognized artist. He was a good painter. I visited the Roerich Museum in New York. Over the years, I befriended Sina Fosdick, who was a direct disciple of the Roerichs. She passed away in the 1980s. We had written, exchanged letters, so Agni Yoga became my path, my personal path. I read the books, I did meditations. I never went to meetings because there were no groups where I lived in Santa Fe. At least no legitimate groups recognized by the society. There were some maverick organizations that were cults from within the sect of Theosophy, if you want to call them that. So I pursued that, and I also met these wonderful two people, Faith and Warren in Santa Fe, that had a photo business. They had just come back from a conference in California in 1975. They had been to Elizabeth Clare Prophet's Church Universal and Triumphant conference. And they introduced me somewhat a few years later, to what it was about, because they were secretive when I first met them. They wouldn't talk openly about this. They had just been newly initiated into the group. And prior to that, this couple lived for years with Swami Rudrananda in New York at his ashram. Rudrananda, or Rudy as they called him, died of a heart attack in 1973. some of his disciples. One you may know is the current Adi Da, or Dafri John, or whatever his name he goes by these days. He has changed it 7 or 8 times. He owns a large ashram in one of the Fiji Islands. He's an American who followed the teacher of Muktananda, Swami Nityananda, and Rudrananda was also a follower of Nityananda. You're shaking your head, you know all this, okay. So Faith and Warren broke away from the ashram because Rudy died, they had no guru, and they ended up with Elizabeth Prophet as the guru. They told me that Elizabeth Prophet, her youngest daughter, Tatiana, was the reincarnation of Helena Rorich. I said, whoa, you know, that sounds interesting. And that the Agni Yoga teachings, which I was very familiar with by 1978, I read them all and was immersed in it somewhat, were the highest 4th level teachings. There were 4 levels in the Church Universal and Triumphant School. And I said, well, what, you know, so I was curious, you know. I said, I need to go see if I feel this is Helen Rorich reincarnated, because I liked the lady. I was impressed with her writings at the time. And I subsequently went to one of their large gatherings. They had quarterly gatherings in California, in the Malibu foothills at the time. 5,000 people were there, and the first time I went to one of the Church Universal and Triumphant gatherings for a weekend. My first wife, Stephanie, when I came back from that experience out there, she later divorced me within a half a year of that. And she said, "You are not the man I married anymore." So what happened to me? We had been together for 7 years. What exactly happened to me? You know, she knew me very well. I mean, we had our problems. You know, we had separation. We had a 2-year-old daughter. Nadia, who now lives in Australia, is married down there and teaching. She's 28. But what happened? Why would she divorce me? I'll talk about that a little bit later. So what I'm trying to put into context here is that the Great White Brotherhood movements is something that I'm very familiar with because I immersed myself with them. So when I came upon the idea of Ramtha through my current wife, Becky, who is a professional dancer, she teaches ballet now and had made her living as a dancer for 12 years when she was young. Was also a professional seamstress in Santa Fe, and she sewed for a lady named Athena, a wealthy woman who was a personal friend of Shirley MacLaine's in the early 80s. And Athena told her and me later, because I got to know her, about this Ramtha she got to know and believe in intimately. She would have Ramtha gatherings at her house back then, showing the tapes that were being, you know, out. And so that was one of my first indications. Athena knew, you know, because by then I was a critic of this kind of thing. And so we were friends, but she was a little wary of me attending the meetings, and I went, and she herself did a little channeling on her own and felt she couldn't do it while I was in the room, so I excused myself and left them to their, you know. But I attended one of the Ramtha meetings back then to get an idea what this was about, and saw one of the early tapes that JZ had put out, video. I also was, being an artist, I did lots of different kinds of work, including street portraits in Santa Fe of tourists, and I must have sketched, I think, 7,000 people over the years out there in the summers over a 14-year span. So I also did pastel portraits of pets, horses, dogs, cats, goats, prize bulls, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. And so I went down to drum up some business at the Arabian Horse show in Albuquerque, I recall, around 1984, I think it was, around there. And I had picked up this brochure of Messiah Arabians and noticed that there was this Ramtha connection. And I didn't know much about the group at the time, but it kind of began to cue me in that there was something big going on with it. And so that was my first introduction to it. And of course, a lot of you know that I got to know Jeff Knight. He had read one of my papers I had written about the Ramtha organization, which helped him understand what he was in. And he said it was like the icing on the cake for him. That's what he told me regarding his exit from the group in terms of understanding it in context. And so I thought inadvertently I'd helped him. And I met him later, and even though JZ's lawyer didn't qualify me as an expert, I was able to testify in his evidentiary hearing in the divorce hearing settlement over the divorce settlement. They let me testify anyway, so I was his first witness. And that was the last time I think I saw him, because he died a couple years later, I believe. So that's another connection I have to this, and it's, you know, it's for the members. I'm on the other side. I'm one of the outsiders. I'm a critic. I'm part of the dark force, or whatever you want to call it. You know, it's up to you to label me that way. I mean, I know where I stand on this, and I'm very comfortable with it, and I'm still learning. I continue to learn every day about this field. It's not an easy thing to tackle. I certainly don't have a lot of time. I have a family to raise. I have 2 other daughters, and I work full time. And, you know, I got off the road doing what's known as exit counseling back in 1998. I only do that sort of work part time now, and do this kind of thing rarely, where I lecture and work with people, because I just don't have the time, and I need to be home. The kind of work that exit counselors do demands a lot of road travel. It's more for a single person. It's not for someone that has a family. And so I had to back away from it. And of course, I still pursue my art career. Let me go to the next phase of this. Okay, so I mentioned in the sheet that I handed out that I would talk a little about Ramtha in context, and I think I did already. I mean, there are early tapes where Ramtha says, you know, that he, the male entity, is part of the Council of 13 of the Great White Brotherhood, and Christ being one of them, and others weren't named, as far as I recall. Not a whole lot, that was in the earlier days. It was more of an identification with, you know, the Church of the I Am and the I Am movement type of teachings back then. If you look, there's a lot of parallels, and when I recognized it immediately as I listened to tapes, probably a few dozen of the audio tapes that were put up by Ramtha, I could recognize bits and pieces from earlier teachings that proliferated through the Ramtha dialogues. So that's essentially the context that it comes from, and of course, the late 80s, there was in the late 70s through the early 80s, there was a burgeoning of the channeling phenomenon. It got so big. For instance, they did a survey in Los Angeles alone in 1988, I think it was, or 87 to 88, counted about 1,300 people channeling entities in Los Angeles alone. That didn't count many I knew in New York and Santa Fe and all around the country. So it was there was a large market out there, obviously, for this kind of spiritual interaction with the other world, if you want to call it that. JZ Knight happened to be one of the more dynamic, charismatic figures in that world by the mid '80s, and you all know her history, I guess, if you study her, with the Hollywood movie set and all of that. But there were far more successful in terms of numbers and money out there. Like Elizabeth Prophet had about 25,000 members in her peak. I mean, there were people internationally involved with the group. Her group fell apart, interestingly enough, for a variety of reasons, because of controversies, but lately primarily because she developed Alzheimer's and was diagnosed with it publicly. It was announced in 1997. And there was a falling away. The group is about 10% of what it used to be. They still own a lot of property, but they've fallen away. The same thing happened to the I Am group. When Guy Ballard died in 1939, most of the members believed in the teachings that said he had an indestructible body, that he would ascend bodily in this lifetime. And he didn't. He died in the hospital of arterial sclerosis. The information got out. A lot of people got upset and thought they'd been fooled. And you know, besides all the other tensions they were living under, they had spent a lot of money. They had left their families. They had, you know, done a lot of that sort of thing in order to follow this very, very unique path. It was the only way to ascension on Earth at the time. You know, that's what they believed. And so there was a large falling away then. And then the I Am group also went to court in 1940 over 19 counts of fraud, U.S. versus Ballard in California. That was a landmark case in religious studies. If you're a religious scholar, Judge Jackson's ruling in that case in 1946 still holds, with trials regarding these kinds of groups. If you want to look it up, it's interesting if you're interested in case law. They were, the case was eventually thrown out, but the IM was not allowed to use the U.S. mails to disseminate their teachings until 1956. They had to be reinstated according to law. A lot of people fell away from the group during that trial period because so much was exposed in the public. The press was covering it and all of that, and people were upset with what they were hearing. So, so groups like this are not, they're not immune to controversy, obviously, because they're very much on the cutting edge or the lunatic fringe, depending how you want to look at it. But they're out there, one way or the other. And as a result, for better or for worse, they're going to be controversial. There's going to be pissed off ex-members. The leaders tend to be inept. They rely a lot on information that's fed back to them from the members, and they often are naive. Sometimes the members aren't giving them good information. And the entity says something really ridiculous, and people say, what was that? I've been here 10 years, I've never heard him say that, and they leave. So that's very common in channeling groups. And, I've heard it over and over again in Church Universal and Triumphant. The leader sometimes is caught in compromising situations. This book, written by two dear friends of mine, Kenneth Paolini and Talita Paolini, a couple, 400 Years of Imaginary Friends, published in 2000, the year 2000. Kenneth and Talita were very dedicated members for 10 years, and they met in the group of Church Universal and Triumphant. Kenneth was chief of security in the group when they moved to Montana. He was licensed to carry weapons. He knew the guru well enough, and I'm not going to tell all the stories, but one time he walked in a room that he had to check on his routine. He saw her naked having intercourse with one of the members in there, and listed, walked out. And that was 2 years before he left the group. That kind of thing is a shocker to members that think their leader's pure. And yet, he stayed for a couple of years, him and his wife, before they left in 1987. They got together and wrote this book. The title, 400 Years of Imaginary Friends, refers to what they believe was the origin in all their research of the Great White Brotherhood idea, and it goes back to Rosicrucianism. And they document it very well. They did a very good job. They did a lot of research on this, and look at their personal history as well as where their beliefs came from and what was inherently wrong with them from the new point of view. So they document all that. I wrote the introduction to the book, so I was kind of happy to do that for them. I had helped them a lot when they left the organization. Another interesting thing about this, these two people lost everything. They came out broke, penniless from the organization. They had nothing. Their families helped them out a little bit. They lived in a little tiny house in Prey, Montana. They homeschooled their children, 2 kids, wonderful children. And they're struggling. They're sort of making a living. And their young son, Chris, was homeschooled. He began writing a book. He finished it. Began this trilogy. He finished it when he was around 17. And they decided it was good enough to self-publish, so they got some money together. They self-published the book, went on the road with it. It began to sell pretty well. The Knopf company, large publishing company, picked up on Kenneth's son's book. He was fly fishing with his son, the editor from Knopf, and the son found the book in a Livingston, Montana bookstore, the self-published version. Knopf got impressed with it, and they took it over. So the book Aragon, that you may have seen in bookstores, became a bestseller, especially for that group of children and young adults. And it's a movie's coming out soon based on it. The kid's wealthy. Their son is wealthy right now. So sometimes there's glory after the group, after all that sacrifice they went through. But the book's out of print. You may be able to find their story online, used copies. That's all I've seen lately. But it was sold out within a year and a half, and they never reissued it. Let's see. Some of the things that happen, I want to talk about this. What's the attraction? Why do people join something like this? And I've heard hundreds, if not thousands, of stories of miracles, of sensations, of ecstasies, of incredible experiences people have, you know, to get involved in some kind of an organization that other people see as weird, a fraud, eccentric. You know, so what is that bridge that has someone cross over so quick and seem to stop thinking about all that other, you know, that other people might think about the group? And often it happens in a kind of an ecstatic experience that someone might have, I recall one fellow that became one of the leaders in Church Universal and Triumphant in the early 70s. He eventually left the group, but he said when he first heard about it, he was curious, and he ordered the group's Bible, which was called Climb the Highest Mountain, similar to the White Book of Ramtha. It kind of defined what they were teaching. And he said when the book came in the mail, it wasn't even unwrapped, but when he touched it, his name is Rory Ingalls, when he touched it, this tingling went up his spine. And he was just like energized in a way he had never felt before. You know, so what is that about? And anyway, so he read it. It was poorly written, you know, it wasn't a great book, but he was intrigued enough with his experience to follow it. And subsequently became one of the better recruiters in the organization, until he got to know the leader very, very well. And he broke away. He was devastated for a year. And then pulled his life together after 4 years of service to the organization. One more story out of thousands that I've listened to. But it all started with this uncanny spiritual experience. You know, where does that come from? What is that? That's something that we in exit counseling study a lot. How does that happen to people? Can that be induced? Is that self-induced? Is that really of God? Is it the brain producing something? Is it an inadvertent interpretation of circumstance that we put together in our own heads, when in fact it has no meaning whatsoever? What is all that? You know, how does that happen? Can it be manipulated by a group? You know, can they? You know, often in my work, in Santa Fe especially, because there were so many of these groups came through to give workshops, to do recruitment, and I would attend them. And most of them would do something like have you do a meditation, have you do a chant, to experience, you know, a little bit about what they're about. So invariably, a lot of the mistakes people make in their seeking path is they trust personal experience as their guide to the next step. Often that's a big mistake. That's what I've found. They don't stop and think, they stop, experience, and go. They want to believe that, which is a narcissistic, we all have a bit of narcissism in us, I do too. It's a narcissistic idea that if we can, if we experience it, it's got to be true. Another way to put it is, a lot of the New Age groups especially tap into this narcissism. They say that, okay, you come here now, and we do want to help the world, you know, we do want to help the world, we're not selfish. However, this is about self-realization. In order to help the world, we've got to get rid of all that stuff that you have hanging on from the past. We've got to, you know, purify. We've got to increase your occult power. Imagine, you know, if you can heal people with the power of thought. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So we have these techniques we can teach you. Transcendental meditation does that. They have a trademark technique that they teach. They've been doing it for a long time, all the way up to the Siddha courses. And it's endless. I mean, Scientology says the same thing when you go, and you have to take all these courses. You know, you have to become clear before you can become a useful human being. And so what happens, you see most people, 90% of them that are in, are going round and around with these rituals and whatever, getting clearer and purer and clearer and purer. It seems to never end for some people. And some people question that later on and wonder, where am I going? You know, I still have the same urges to smoke. You know, I still get irritated with my wife when she's having her period. You know, I still, you know, all the mundane things that all the other people go through, I'm still going through them. Where's the purity? Where's the clarity? Where's the godliness? You know, why? I've been practicing C&E for 3 years. I've been meditating. I've been decreeing. You know, I've been doing this technique. And so the prejudice of the narcissist is that that by purifying myself, I can purify the world. And some magical way. You know, by playing the role of a god, I can influence the world. If you look at the clinical description, in which I'm immersed in this field of Axis 1, Axis 2 disorders. An Axis 2 disorder in the personality scale, one of them is narcissism. And there's a clinical description of it. It'd be interesting to read that for anybody that's in this kind of group. Take a look at it, because you're kind of looking at yourself. Sometimes this can turn into a disorder. It becomes kind of an obsessive way of life to be a narcissist. And it's not healthy. It is really not healthy. A little bit of it we need. We need to play roles. We need to be narcissistic when we're looking for a job. We need to, you know, put on our best clothing, our best language. I mean, that's normal. There's nothing unhealthy about that. But when you get into this other realm, that somehow you can magically recreate your personality to affect the world, you're moving into weird territory there. Very weird territory. Some of my mental patients that come into the hospital in their psychosis believe this. It's interesting when I listen to them in their mania or whatever. I often hear sometimes a New Age leader talking. It sounds just like them. It's weird. So you know, there is that. Let me get toward the end of this because I want to open up for question and answer. I'm hoping I'm stimulating some questions here. That's what I'm mainly interested in hearing from you. There's many people have studied, you know, the whole idea of what creates a bounded group, closed system, a totalist organization, cult in quotes. I mean, that word is abused today. It's not used in its normal sense. If you go, for instance, and I have gone to many of these sociology conventions, I've even presented papers, for instance, at this Association for the Sociology of Religion twice. And to the large American Academy of Religion conference where about 8,000 scholars will show up and workshops for days. I mean, you get a headache just looking at the list of stuff that they're talking about religion. And but they often use the word cult in those high academic circles in its proper sense. You know, for instance, you can do a paper on the cult of the Eucharist in the Catholic Church. You can do a paper on the cult of the Virgin Mary in the Catholic Church. I'm Catholic and I'm not offended by that word. There's lots of cults in the Catholic Church. There's the cult of the saints. You know, so it's proper to say, you know, in discussion about new religions, which is the more benign word people use, that, you know, you have the cult of Ramtha. It's a perfectly academic term to use. It's not pejorative in that sense. You know, you have the cult of Moria in the Agni Yoga movement. You know, so that's how I tend to use the word. I try to be careful with it, because I know it's a loaded term, you know, and a lot of people that aren't well read in the field look at it in a very pejorative way. But, you know, it's just one of those words that's like the word gay and others that have gone into another dimension in our popular speech, and we have to go sometimes with how the population uses it. But people that have studied the phenomena, that, you know, of brainwashing, thought reform, and all this sort of thing have refined how they see that, and I can give you a book list if you're interested in that and how to look at that. Professor Zablocki, who's a friend of mine at Rutgers University, you know, he looked at the brainwashing phenomena. One of the few sociologists that ever dared, you know, has recently dared to look at it, and he had studied modern groups that have controversy around them for about 30 years. And he sees the idea not so much of brainwashing as what is done to you to get into a group. It's what you do to yourself to keep yourself from exiting the group. It's the exit costs. What is it going to cost me to leave this group? Am I going to lose my salvation? Am I going to lose my investment? Am I going to lose my friends? Am I going to lose my God? Am I going to lose you know, years of loyalty? What is it going to cost me now that I don't like being here so much? What is it going to cost me to leave? Some people choose to leave a group like Ramtha or Church Universal, or there's hundreds of thousands of them maybe. They'll choose to leave and yet delay actual stepping away from everything for years. That's not uncommon. They know they have to leave, they don't leave because of the exit costs. So the brainwashing is this. It's mind control within the self. It's the policing of your own thoughts. The continual justification of why you're there. Even though all the evidence seems to show that there's something very weird about this. Science tells us that this can't be true, yet the group says it is true. You know, like Transcendental Meditation claims that their meditation technique is a science. Scientists have looked at it and go, no, it's a belief. and so there's a conflict there. But the member in the inside of the organization, the Siddha, who's deeply involved as a monk, will continue to justify being there. What's intriguing, I keep hearing from people when I lecture to audiences, you know, what kind of people join these groups? You know, I talk to police departments, Native American tribes, schools, college audiences over the years. And my answer has always been, you know, because they're looking for a profile of the cult member. And I say, I'm looking at them. And they wonder, you know, well, what do you mean? Anybody, you know, the thing is, there's no such thing as a box that you can put the word cult in or that group. These groups are varied. There's all different formations of it. One group called No Wave down in Louisiana had about 30 members. They were all medical students, mostly male, run by a professor from the organization that followed the teachings of Gurdjieff, the fourth way type thing. The ritual they used at the beginning and the end was to drink a shot of whiskey, Jack Daniels only. Something special about Jack Daniels. So that was a medical student cult. No one else belonged to it. There was another one. All flight attendants were involved. Only flight attendants in Los Angeles, female flight attendants. This guy was had rented apartments. He would recruit flight attendants to rent his apartments. And he had an uncanny control over these ladies' lives. Weird. It was a social cult. It wasn't religiously based. But he had this uncanny control over their movements. They confessed it. It was more like this little psychotherapy thing going on. So there's a wide variation of this kind of behavior out there. I mean, there's no one way to describe it. So, you know, there's some for very intelligent people. There's some for people that are you know, snake handlers that haven't read a book. You know, there's all kinds of people that ways of clustering people into a tightly drawn circle where their choices are limited, even though they feel they're free. So that, you know, that's something that exit counselors study in this whole world of new religious studies that's been looked at. So I'll wrap this part of it up by just giving you a little bit of my history here. When I left Church Universal and Triumphant in 1980, I went to a final conference, and I knew this thing wasn't for me anymore, but I wanted to kind of get a sense of it. So I participated, and I just began to look around and pay attention rather than participate. For instance, one fellow I met, he was, I'll call him Glenn, but he had been in the 3HO, the Happy, Healthy, Holy group that Yogi Bhajan ran from the early 70s on. And they had a big contingent in Santa Fe, so I knew the group very well. They used to have their summer conference there. Over 1,000 or more would show up in their white turbans and whatever that they wore. They were a form of American Sikhism, which they reinstated the guru concept. The Sikhs don't believe in a living guru. That they stopped centuries ago with Guru Gobind Singh. He ended it. The guru became the book, the Adi Granth. Like the Quran is to the Muslims, the Granth is the guru. The book is the guru to the guru. But Yogi Bhajan reinstated the idea of guru concept to Sikhism in America. He was one of dozens of Indians that did this. And he was known as the Mahan Tantric, meaning the most powerful tantric master on the face of the earth. Only one can be there on the earth at the time, like in the Highlander. There can be only one, and he was the one. Okay?
I'm the one.
And this is what all the members believe. So, and they would do tantric rituals, you know, dyad meditations of energies flying around and all this stuff that you read about in tantric books. They believed all this stuff was happening to them. Well, Glenn was part of that with his family, his wife and kids, for like 6 years. Totally dedicated, immersed in the 3HO. Things happened again. He got to know the leader, and of course, the leader was being sued at the time for raping 2 women, and they took him to court. his so-called sexual, or I forget what the name they had for this. There was an Eastern term, but he had his women. Let me put it that way. And Glenn got upset with this, and so he began checking out other spiritual groups, and he came to Elizabeth Clare Prophet's group, and I met him 6 months after he joined. When I talked to him, his hair was all shorn. He had long hair like a Sikh. You never cut your hair. It's one of the 5 Ks in Sikhism. You don't cut your hair. It just grows, and you wear a turban over it. He had had it cut off by then. And he told me an interesting story, and this is what hooked him on the group. He was just checking it out, but one day when he was there, he felt this, oh no, it happened second. He got a personal audience with Elizabeth Prophet, because he stood out. He's there with his white turban on and his white clothing, and he comes to one of their conferences. And so she got to know him. And he, you know, emptied his soul, told her that this thing's not working, he's afraid, and all this. And she did a clearance with him, with Glenn. Elizabeth Prophet said, you know, she would call the masters in, and she held his hands. And he said that he just felt this rush of like a rapid, a water flushing through his body when she held him. It just flushed him out, and he just, you know, shuddering. And he felt this ecstasy for over a day afterwards. He, you know, I mean, incredible stuff. And then he said the next day, he was out there in the field, and close to where we were sitting at the time. This is in Malibu, in the foothills. And he said he felt this dark energy coming. And he knew it was Bhajan or something about him. And he felt that he had to get his family inside the chapel there to protect them. He didn't know what it was. He just felt this thing happening. And they found it, they took, you know, he told the staff about it. And of course, they believe in this kind of thing, dark forces in that movement. So they'd taken him in, and he said that he was going in, his kids and his wife were in the chapel already. And as they were walking past a tree, a large tree, like a thunder crack blew on top of their head, and a large branch fell down, hit one of the staff members, missed him. And he looked up and he saw Yogi Bhajan's face hovering there. What's that about? You know, what is that about? I'm hearing this guy, and I'm looking at the tree, and sure, there's a broken tree branch up there. You know, the evidence is right there. What happened? I don't know. But it sure as hell convinced him to stay in Church Universal and Triumphant for, you know, the next how many years. Now, eventually he left. And why did he leave? He got close to the Guru, began to know her. Something happened. So, you know, believe me, I've hundreds and hundreds of stories like that I've heard from people. I've done, when I first left Church Universal, and you know, I decided to leave it after that conference. People asked me, why are you leaving? You know, you're one of these people that a lot of people like me. They thought I could be an artist for the group. All this stuff was happening, and I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just kind of figured it out, and I had a few spiritual experiences afterwards, and I decided this isn't it. There's something wrong with this. And I began to read the really critical literature out there, and it was like my eyes were newly opened. I could really read, understand, comprehend, process that stuff. I couldn't do it before when I was a believer. When I stepped out, it suddenly cleared up. And some of the people that were in the group, including Faith and Warren, that had sort of recruited me, asked me, you know, why aren't you coming to meetings? What's going on? I said, you really want to hear this? And I sat down with them after 4 or 5 hours, 5 years of dedication, talking to me. You know, and of course they were having a struggle with the group too. They left it. 4 or 5 other people that talked to me within that month left it. But this is a common cycle in these groups. Someone figures it out, or decides it's not for them. Other people ask why you're leaving. They're sort of on the fence, and they leave too. I mean, so I experienced that. And then I met a young lady in a mall, in a shopping mall, who was in a Bible cult, Christian cult in Santa Fe. I didn't know it. She asked me to do her portrait for her fiance, and but she worked there. Anyway, to make a long story short, I got to know her, and she talked to me about this group she was in, and I started exploring it with her, and she started changing her mind. It was based on some stuff. I said, well, that's the same thing I learned about the Bible in Church Universal and Triumphant. You know, we distorted Isaiah 45:11 the same way your group is doing. We were a New Age group. You're a Bible cult. You know, name it and claim it religion, as they call it. You know, the quote is, it's a misquote or mistranslation in the King James, and it's, you know, command ye me, God says, to Isaiah. In other words, the idea is that you can command God to do something for you. But if you look at the real translation, it's not what it says. That's only in the Old King James. But all these cults use that translation, including Bible cults and New Age cults. So I talked her out of this thing, and I was going to travel to India. I was about to leave a month later. And I'm pumping gas on my old truck, and I hear someone calling out my name at this gas station in Santa Fe. And it was her. I hadn't seen this young lady. She was 19. And she was with her parents in this big pickup truck. And the father came over to me and he says, "You're the guy, you know." I didn't know this, and he wanted to take me to dinner, you know, and I went to dinner with these people. What had happened was, they didn't even know where she was for 6 months. The group had gotten her to cut off communication with them because they said something that they were Christians, they were Baptist Christians, they raised her that way, but this was a very eccentric form of Christianity. And cut her off from communication with her family, and they were just amazed. So she called up, she says, "I'm out of this." And they go, "How did it happen?" "I met this guy in this mall." You know, so I look back at that as launching my exit counseling career. You know, it kind of taught me something that you know, this is really powerful stuff. You know, this is families are in pain, people are misdirected. A little bit of information can change everything. You know, so that I didn't become a professional in the field until 1986. I never charged money until then, and I had to because it was taking up so much of my time, and I began to go on the road, and it became my main means of income until 1998. And I've been on cases in Australia 16 times, in Europe many times, all over the United States. 450 different kinds of groups I had in my files by the time I quit doing it full time. So, and Ramtha was one of the groups. That kind of fits this description of controversy that we're talking about here. All right, I'm going to stop. I want to open this up for question and answer. If you have anything, you can challenge me. Believe me, I've heard of that. So you can go ahead. Yes, sir.
Joe, I was on both sides of Scientology, in and out. And my question to you is simply, well, what's your solution to life? Are you going to accept 70 years and 10 and sell us that deal? I mean, we'll make you the guru. Now, what do you offer me?
Everybody asks me that question. Everybody that I work with in exit counseling comes up with that question.
You help me.
If you know so much, what's the truth? Okay, they ask me that question. And my answer has always been, you're asking the wrong question. In order to get to the truth in philosophy, and every philosopher knows this that's studied, it's not about the answers. It's not about the answer I can give you. It's about getting you to refine your questions, to refine the quest. The better your questions are in science, in sociology, in philosophy, in medicine, the more refined, the more you understand about the topic, the more refined your questions become. Your quest becomes more wise. You can eliminate a lot of the BS and get to what you want and what you're getting to. Now, do I have an answer that says one religion is the best religion on earth? No. You know, I'm Roman Catholic. I don't expect people to be Roman Catholic to get saved. People say, "How can you be a Roman Catholic? You know all about the priests, dealing with little boys and all this stuff going on, and the history of the church, the Crusades, and it's the biggest cult in the world." Yeah, maybe it is. I don't know. There might be others. But there's another way to look at the great religions, and I call them great for a reason. They've been around, they've served a purpose for a long time. There's an elegant way to participate in a religion, and there's an elegant way for a religion to behave in society. It's a two-way street. Okay. The religions that are in their elegant status, certain aspects of Hinduism, for instance, you can find. If you want to see the elegant aspect of Hinduism, you can read Gita Mehta's book, The River Sutra, a wonderful fable of what the essence of the Hindu religion is about. I'd recommend it to anybody. If you want to read about Japanese Buddhism, what's the essence of Japanese? The Heart of Buddhism by Takeuchi, Japanese monk. Wonderful book. takes you right to the heart of what is it about? What makes it elegant? Well, how can you refine your quest within that faith? The same thing exists in Catholicism. You can read the writings of, some of the unknown philosophers in the organization, but you can read Thomas Aquinas. You can look at St. John of the Cross. You can refine your search within any faith group. Within the Muslim faith, they're having the struggle right now in Islam. What does Islam really mean? Islam has never really gone through a scholastic phase because a lot of the fundamentalist sects, and it's not so unified. The Catholics have an advantage in that they have a magisterium, a college of cardinals that continually argue and refine the faith. The quest goes on and on and on in Catholicism. So Catholics have an advantage. They can reach up and find something very refined because it's already been in place for hundreds of years. The Muslims don't have that. They don't have a central authority. There's many big factions. And due to the nature of the faith, it's the cleric who interprets the Quran according to his own spiritual direction. So it's a diverse religion within itself. It's much more difficult to get a handle on what's refined about the Islamic faith. But there's been some good efforts. There's one, I recommend the book. I just read it 6 months ago. It's fabulous. Called No God But God. And his take on his own religion, this young Muslim scholar, is excellent, I think. I mean, it answers a lot of questions. It doesn't ignore the dirty laundry. I mean, it's right there, and you can find the beauty in Islam in the book. So that's my answer to you. It's a long-winded answer, but I don't have an ultimate truth to hand you. I'm not going to be anybody's guru, but if you refine your quest, if you expand your notions, you're going to get a little better at this. That's the only answer I have. Yes? Go ahead.
I'm just wondering why you're talking about religion here. Ramtha School of Enlightenment is a school, and you're talking about religions. I'm wondering if you're comparing apples and shoes.
No. Ramtha by scholars has been defined as a new religious movement. It fits the definition. You can call it anything you want. You can call it a school. You can call it a mystery school. You can call it a spiritual experience. You have the right to label it anything you want. However, in the academic world, it is a new religious movement, and it fits the narrow definition of particular kind of new cults that are out there. Unfortunately or fortunately, you have to live with that. You can't change that. Yes?
Excuse me, but the school has actually been to the courts, and it is not a cult.
No, it's a corporation. It's a non-profit group. I didn't say it was a cult by one definition, but it is by a particular definition. Yes, it is. There is a cult of Ramtha. It exists.
Joe, it is a for-profit group, actually.
A what?
It's a for-profit organisation.
It's for-profit. I meant to say that. It's not a not-for-profit organization. I'm sorry. Yes. Go ahead.
What is the difference between self-responsibility and the attitude of victimization?
The question is, what's the distinction or the difference between the responsibility you take for yourself for getting involved in something that may not be right, and the idea of victimization. There's no direct dichotomy there. You're looking at maybe two ways of looking at the same thing. We're talking about relationship here. When you talk about religious movements or whatever, you don't have victims unless somebody's victimizing someone. There's a relationship going on there. You can become a victim of nature. A tree can fall on you. Does that mean it's evil? I don't know. Maybe not. But you are victimized. You are an accident. You have to go to the hospital. You do all that. In my case, when I bailed out of Church Universal and Triumphant and that system of groups, I was disturbed by the fact that the leaders were deceptive and they were borrowing teachings from other sources. For instance, Blavatsky claimed to be inspired by the masters, but in her secret doctrine, she made some attributions to other authors. But there were over 1,300 instances of now documented plagiarism from 100 different books that she always carried around with her. She didn't attribute that stuff to anybody but these masters. You know, that disturbs me. Was I victimized by that? Yeah. Well, how much responsibility should I take? I take total responsibility for that, and I did. I researched, I dug it out. I was pissed off. And the way I dealt with my anger was to educate myself. That's what I did. I didn't go after the group. I educated myself, and I got, you know, and I try to share that with people. But I took responsibility for that. I didn't blame them. I was disturbed, but I didn't blame the group. Yes?
I've been a student of RISC for about 17 years, and I'm not real interested in your opinion of the school. What I am interested in, what I came here to hear, is I'm very curious to know what it is that you offer on the other side of RSC for these poor people. I'm sure that you have just thousands and thousands of people to draw on that are unhappy with situations and people from our school.
Right.
So I want to know what it is that you offer the people on the other side of that for them.
Read this book to answer your question. Take Back Your Life. Just came out. It's a rewriting of the book Captive Hearts, Captive Minds, written by Janja Lalich and Madeline Tobias. Both ladies I know very well. Janja currently has a PhD. She's the Associate Professor of Sociology at Chico University. When Janja was young, she was had a merit scholarship, total free ride through college. Very bright. She worked as an editor for a long time to make money. She got involved in a left-wing political group in the United States. It's a relatively small group. It took up 10 years of her life, 20s into her early 30s. The group ended, and she talks about it in another book she has called Bounded Choice that she put out. It was her dissertation, and it came out, the university liked the dissertation so much, they published it. That came out about 3 years ago. So she had 10 years of experience in what I call, what we call a controversial totalist system. It was a left-wing communist group in the United States. It was claiming to be doing good for workers' rights and migrant rights and all that kind of thing. It was run essentially by a woman who was an alcoholic, who studied some of the teachings of Chavez and others who organized workers' rights on the communist. You'd have to read her book. I'm not going to explain everything that happened, but she had a very deep personal experience with this kind of thing, and emerged from it, and later on became a scholar and an expert in the field. And so she was one of the co-authors of this book. Madeline Tobias. Madeline Tobias is a therapist now. She works with soldiers in Vermont. She's works at a clinic that's funded by the government to treat post-traumatic stress syndrome. A lot of her clients are guys that, since the Vietnam War days when they developed this disorder, still live in the woods. They can't be around people. They come to the clinic a few times a week for therapy and get medication and disappear. Some of them are more normalized, but that's her work. That's what she does right now. But she was in a group, psychotherapy group, run by a very charismatic individual that she later discovered after 10 years working for this guy was a sociopath. And she describes that also in her, there's a little bit of that in here. But those are the two women that wrote this book. They know this topic intimately. They cover every aspect of that you can imagine, or at least introduce you to it, of what it means to emerge from a group experience like this and begin taking back your life. So that's a first step. To answer your question. Yeah.
What is the life that you're going to? For me, it never occurred to me to ever not go to school.
And does it occur to you now?
Because it is a fabulous life. I don't have this emotional
Yeah, but does it occur to you now to leave?
No.
Okay, well, we have nothing to talk about. You can stay
I
there
just
for the rest of your life.
wanted to know where you're going.
Well,
I'm curious about you. And
well, that's what I've been talking of. You've been listening to me.
I'm hearing a lot of what it is, but I'm not hearing very much of what it is.
You mean what the school is, or what life is outside the group?
Where are you going with this? I would love to see these people move on and get on with their life. I'm just curious where you're going with it.
Okay, maybe somebody could make a comment. Have I said anything that might help you move on with your life? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Renee, and I would love to make a comment
Okay.
at this time. When you said no God but God, I'm sitting here with so many thoughts flying through my mind.
That's the title of a book on Islam.
Right,
Right.
right. But I like the title. I don't need to read the book. I like the title. Because it applies to my whole experience in the school. I was in the school for 10 years. I will say, and I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, and I'll say that again. One of the second greatest thing I ever did in my life was to join the school.
Okay.
The first greatest thing I ever did in my life was to leave the school. Not, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, because the journey, I allowed myself through much pain and agony and struggle and suffering, the journey I allowed myself to go through was one of the most fantastic journeys that I have ever gone on. And now I know why. I cannot consider the 10 years a waste. I know why. But I'm saying this for any of those who are struggling now, who are going through a shattering experience, and I've heard people say their lives were shattered after they left, that you can, I would love to share my experience with you. And I'm available to do that. I said enough.
All right,
Thank you.
When did you leave the school?
Point of fact.
95.
Hold on a second, I got a question here, yeah.
Point of fact for this young lady. The Ramtha JZ has gone through a multiplicity of changes of organization. There was a period of time, it was the church I am. It was designated as religion, then we kind of moved away from that to just nonprofit. Then we moved into this whole hoorah that it's Gnosticism religion, the school of Gnosticism. And then it moved into a corporate for-profit organization. So it's been a school, it's been a religion, it's been a profit-making organization. It's had many faces. And the teaching went from essentially what this lady is saying, God, one God, listen within. That's where you'll hear it, the power of that sacred, divine, whatever oneness is. The power of that within us, through us, available to everyone. My words will be true 100 years from now. Except it only lasted about 5 or 6 years, and then it became the Ramtha School of Enlightenment, in which case it became the power over mind, over matter. It degraded or descended to the human ego and the power of the individual over things, mind over matter. Totally opposite teaching.
Yeah.
Just point of information.
Okay. Yeah, so you see the group itself doesn't stick with any definition of itself. It's changing, and who knows in about 10 years what it will call itself. Maybe it'll be a religion again. Who knows? Yeah. You're not. No member is in control of that. That's management's job to define the group and determine whether it's going to be a corporation or a religion or whatever. Any other? Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. And then you'll be next.
My name is
You, Greg.
My name is Sarah. I started in the teachings long before there was a school. I've been in the school. I've left the school, so you know. And I respect the path that you're on. I believe that there is no wrong path. And the things that people come to you, I would imagine a lot of family members come to you and say, this person has given over their whole life to this cult. They've spent all their money. They haven't progressed in their life. They've given their 10 years to it. I think we need to recognize that you can apply the word cult to anything. And what I've just said, you could very well apply to those people. I know a few have given 10 to 15 years of their life to the Grateful Dead. Spent all their money. They go to every Grateful Dead concert. You can say that about Trekkies. You could say that about every religion on this planet, and I lost track a long time ago. There were 10,000 of them last time I looked up an article.
Well, I mean, I know you're, let me stop you there. I know you're saying me, are you referring to me or to like you in general?
Well, I'm saying that as an exit counselor, you will magnetize to yourself those people who can use your services and who want to leave wherever they're at, whether they're Catholics or Jews or in the Ramtha school or anywhere. Somebody who wants to exit where they're at and go someplace else could perhaps use your services. One thing I realized coming here today is that if somebody is attending the school and thinking maybe this isn't where I want to be anymore, that they will probably, from my own experience, get some more value from talking to people like me, like Renee. There are other people here that are living the fact that there is life after the Ramtha school, there is spiritual growth after the Ramtha school, there's everything, but I don't, at one point in your talk, you talked about, you used the word wrong, and
Wrong about what?
If you've ever read, let's say, the Conversations with God, there's a perspective there that we're here to experience. And whatever we choose to experience, if in a sense God gets to experience and express that through us. So you've given a lot of your life to art. You know, these people have given a lot of their life to the school, but I question how you can say that one path is wrong, one path is right. Giving your 10 years to the Catholic Church is right because it's more established, but giving your 10 years to the Ramtha school is wrong. And the parallels, as far as any religion that hands you a book and says, this is our scripture, here's where you'll find the truth. Where I'm at in my life right now is that that was what God said, perhaps, to one particular person 2,000 years ago. I've learned that God can speak to me right now if I go within and don't need to follow any guru, any particular teaching. The tingling you talked about,
Which one? There were several.
Who would not follow their own personal experience? To me, that would be my soul telling me there's something in this book for you, or there's something on this DVD that you really need to see. If that tingling, if I got that tingling when I picked up Al Gore's book, or Al Gore's DVD, I would probably say, my intuition's telling me there's something in here for me.
Let me stop you there a second. I mean, I don't know if you have a question. I hear you making a statement.
Well, I guess my question is...
But it's just something I'd like to... Can I make a comment and I'll let you continue?
Okay.
One of the things we do in exit counseling, and I can't go through it here, is there's videotapes and explanations for this concept that's of suggestibility and how it works and what we know about it. The studies of Ernest Hilgard, of Stanley Milgram, of Philip Zimbardo and others, and there's a way to demonstrate how we fool ourselves by interpreting certain experiences that we call intuition. And so how do we safeguard against getting misguided by what we feel is true immediately? How do we safeguard against that? Because it can be deceptive. And there's techniques you can use. I mean, some of them are defined in this book. It just came out, I reviewed it a couple of years ago by Kathleen Taylor. She's a neuroscientist from England. Brainwashing, it's called The Science of Thought Control, but her main theme in here is that, you know, the human brain is an incredible instrument. Wonderful. I mean, she studies it. She's done a life of studying it, but it also has a capacity to fool us. And we have to know how that works. You know, it can cause neurological information to expand in your system, and you have reactions that aren't necessarily good guidance sometimes. So her one theme in here is stop and think. what she's saying is that when we engage the neocortex, what creates personality and some other aspects with the whole brain, we can reduce the dissonance, reduce the false choices we make if we just use this organ properly. I mean, she's looking at this from the point of view of the scientist. So there's other ways to examine personal experience, and I know it's very difficult for people to, you know, it's kind of like falling in love. You know, you see someone, you think, wow, you know, that's someone I'd like to date or whatever, and but just because you had that good feeling to begin with doesn't mean that after the third date you're going to really like to be with them, right? You can find out stuff that you didn't know before, and you think, whoa, okay, I'm out of here. So, you know, I understand what you're saying, and we have to listen to our feelings or intuitions. However, if you read the literature and the studies and everything, and I know from my personal experience, those even powerful experiences can fool us. So you have to, you know, stop and think. That's all I'm saying.
I think
that's all she's saying.
I think maybe the thing that you might be missing here.
Okay.
You just use the example of someone who falls in love. They get that tingle, and then let's say they marry the person, and he turns out to be abusive. You know, people do that over and over.
Oh, yeah.
That person, in a sense, enrolled themselves in an inner school, and will go through that, will feel that tingle in connection to that kind of person, will need to go through that experience until they finally realize, I don't need this, I don't want this, I love myself and I don't deserve that. But was it wrong for them to experience being in that bad marriage?
Well, they can decide that it's wrong. I mean, they can, in hindsight, they can say, you know, I made a big mistake. I'm not going to try to not do that again. I mean, that's normal human behavior. We all say that stuff.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'm saying we learn from our mistakes.
Well, hopefully we do.
And there is a perspective that there are no mistakes. There are experiences to learn.
Yeah, I've heard that perspective. I hear it a lot.
So that's
okay. You were going to ask a question, sir.
At the end of what you would call your exit counseling, is there a criteria that you reach where you feel there's some kind of resolution with the process? And if that resolution ends up with somebody saying, okay, I see where I have made these kinds of choices, I'm older and wiser as a result of those choices, do those people get to that level of responsibility? And if they do, then I think you're doing a great service for the school, because then those people have the freedom to make a new choice, whereas right now it doesn't sound as if they have that kind of freedom. So do you get to that level of resolution in that counseling?
During an exit counseling session?
Yeah,
or
I mean,
whatever
something
that
you try to do to get somebody to say, okay, I see what I've done. I'm smarter now because of that. I won't make that choice again. I'm free to make a new choice. Yeah. Do they get to that level of responsibility?
Well, it's the beginning of it.
Okay.
Where they're going to get to, I don't know. I don't determine people's fate after I work with them. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm an educator of a sort, and it's a very specialized field. But the best way I can describe exit counseling is, you know, and it's somewhat, you know, Janja Lalich describes it in her bounded choice theory. We call these circles of influence when we're caught inside of a group that we think we can't leave for whatever reason. We might lose our salvation, let's say, is a big one. So there's a boundary, you know, and there's usually a lot of things that reinforce that boundary. What exit counseling does is begin to test that boundary. And why is the person afraid to look at other information outside the boundary from a historical perspective, from an emotional perspective, from a religious perspective, from an ex-member perspective, from a political perspective? You know, you go around the circle and look at it. And as the exit counselor interacts with the person, gives examples, evidence, whatever you can bring to the conversation, because it's basically a conversation. If new information is making sense to the individual in the group, in the bounded system, they're going to start right there in front of you expanding things that they didn't know before, okay? And their circle starts to expand. So what happens is, you know, after 20, 30 hours of conversation during these sessions with the family and the person, and they don't always work. About 60% of people choose to leave the group when they're talking to me, and about 40 don't. But the ones that do, what happens is that they begin thinking of the group in the past tense. They see themselves as not fitting in anymore. It's like they've expanded and they can't put that suit back on again. It just doesn't feel good, you know. They don't completely understand why. You know, maybe but they know they can't go back. All right, so that's generally what happens in exit counseling. The stages of recovery go on for months and years afterwards. New awarenesses, new adjustments, conversations with other ex-members, self-education, readapting to society and things they had left behind, new socializations that they learn along the way. I mean, all this is more expansive that moves them beyond the group. So the exit counselor is just the person that starts that expansion process, that ends the restriction. That's my main goal. It's not there to give them the path to truth. I'm not there even to say you have to leave the group. I tell them you can stay the rest of your life. That's one of the first things out of my mouth. You know, I'm not here. You know, your family would like you to leave, but I'm just going to give you information that other people have used that have left the group. You can accept it or not accept it. You know, you know, for the most part, and especially for the past 12 years, I mean, I tell people immediately, I said, if any stage in this conversation, even though I surprised you by showing up, you know, because most families don't want to tell people before I come in as an exit counselor. I mean, I tell the person, if you want me to leave, I'll leave at any point. You know, they have power over me at that point. And rarely, I mean, every now and then, sometimes it happens, and I leave. You know, the family that hires me know that's a possibility. They may have spent $2,000 to get me there, you know, with flights and fees and stuff, and it could be over 5 minutes. That's a risk they take. But in most cases, it doesn't happen. People are very, even if they don't leave the group, they really want to talk about things because they're interested in. This is their life. This is their belief system. This is how they, you know, they're curious about someone like myself who has maybe a different perspective in an intimate atmosphere of a living room. I'm not threatening. I'm not going to hurt them. You know, anything I offer them, they can certainly check out and cross-check. You know, it's not like I'm trying to lie to them. So they're all aware of that right from the get-go. They may not agree with me, but that's fine. You know, I'm not there to get an agreement. I'm there to share information. That's basically all exit counseling is. It's a highly specialized form of communication.
So there's no real exact criteria where you would feel like you got your job done other than the information that you were able to share?
No, but I mean, I tell you, I feel good when someone says to me, you know, I'm really glad I met you, I'm out of the group.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, you know, I feel good about that. I don't feel good when someone says, you know, I'm really pissed off you came here, I'm angry at my family, and I'll never talk to them again, which happens sometimes. And I don't like that, but, you know, who would? So, but, you know, you do your best, and sometimes things don't work out. Another question? Yes?
What would you say? My parents have brought me here to you for an exit counseling experience with you. What information would you give me that I don't know, having been in the school? I mean, help us. You know, a lot of the Ramtha students are asking you questions, but there are folks here who really do want to exit or are in that process of exit. Fear is involved, anger is involved, betrayal. Did I betray myself? Did I betray my family? Did I betray God? There's a myriad of emotions that happen. What would you say to me? I've come to you.
Oh, if you come to me and you're already out of the group, or you're not out?
I am already out.
Okay. Well, you know, I'd approach you the same way. I'd have to get to know you a little bit first and allow you to get to know me. Anytime you establish conversation, especially in a situation like that, is you've got to get some rapport, some trust. Otherwise, it's over.
Yes.
You know, so you start, you know, this is my story. I have 3 kids, you know, all that stuff. You know, and I try to hear what that person is in their life at that point. another step is, well, tell me about your group experience. What do you know about it? What do you know about the origins of it and what happened to you? I want to know. And then there might be a lot of things they don't know about their group that I know. How it started, who were the initial people that influenced the individual that started the group. What books did they borrow from to start their teaching? That individual might not know that. I recall one family called me down to talk to their son who was in the Hare Krishna. Bright young man. He was an engineering or science student in college when he dropped out to join the group. And they were Middle Eastern, in the Middle East. And he had gotten sick and the group sent him back because they didn't want to take care of him. They weren't going to pay his hospital bills. So he was home. And the family called me up and said, could you talk to him? So to start it out, I show up, and he's a nice kid, nice guy. He knew what deprogrammers were and all that, and he knew this wasn't that. I wasn't acting like a harsh person, or I wasn't going to hold him against his will. But what I did with that case, and I do with so many, is I sat down with him and I said, what's your problem with your family about this? He says, they don't seem to understand what I'm doing. I said, okay. And I started teaching them about his religion. And he's there, how do you know so much about this? And I'm explaining the word concepts, where the guru came from. It's all neutral. I'm not criticizing a thing, and I went on for hours like this. We talked about India, we talked about some of the roots of the Bhagavad Gita, whether it's canonical or non-canonical in the system, because the Krishnas hold it up as canonical. It's not in Hinduism. But anyway, so we went on, and of course I had the young man in my aura of influence by that point. He wants to know more from me. He's trusting me. We've gotten rapport. And so we go on from there, and then I listen to his problems with the group. And I refer him to people that might be able to help him, and emerge from it. And, so, I don't know if that answers your question, but gaining rapport with someone, whether they're in or out of a group, and then, convincing them that I'm worth talking to is another stage. Maybe I'm not, they don't want to talk to me, okay, I go home. But
so, what knowledge do you have, for instance, of the source of information? Because in the early days, as you said, there was one of the 13.
Well, a lot of questions come up. I mean, I had to keep going back in my own search. And so I take the person back with me, okay, Great White Brotherhood, what is that? Where did it come from?
May I interject for a second? My question is, it's all about this take back your life, and it seems to me very obvious that, put away the white book, the Ramtha book, and here's another book. Taking back your life, who ever asked you to give your life in the first place? Were you ever asked to give your life to the group? That is my question. Why did you give yourself away? And when
Fortunately, I didn't.
And when you talk about what's, stop and think. I don't think in this group, the Ramtha school has ever said, don't think.
Oh,
has
no,
always said think.
Oh, no, they have.
Has always been said think. It's always been said read. Look at every book outside. It's always encouraged. It's always encouraged to find oneself.
Well, let me ask you this, sir.
So I'm just trying to bring a couple of things up here, and taking back your life is a powerful statement. But when did you give it away?
Let me quote Ramtha. Belonging to a group only involves you in a group consciousness. Doing discipline only teaches you discipline. 5 years later, belonged to a group. It became a very, very big deal. What group are you in? Are you Achman Ra? Are you Elohim? Are you whatever? Have you done your discipline? You haven't done your discipline. You're not dedicated. You're not committed. You're not sincere. You haven't done your discipline. Have you done your discipline? Whereas the first 5-10 years of Ramtha was, you don't need all that stuff because it's here and the teacher will come. And the teacher does come in a diversity of forms, and it's all free. Truth, one God, truth is, and it will come to you as your heart is open to it. It's free, it's free. You never, ever, ever, ever have to pay 1 red cent. Look at these trees.
Excuse me, but this group is not free today. On the paper, it says they will make a statement. It's even on the itinerary, announcement for donation to cover fees and expenses. And in the paper, this gentleman, but the gentleman said he does not need to pay to appreciate things in life. Ramtha asks him to pay to appreciate things. The Ram never, you pay for everything you appreciate. I appreciated my children's birth, but I paid for them. You didn't pay for them. I don't know why. You're not even in your child's life. Ramtha never asked you to leave your child. Your children in New Zealand. He never asked you to leave your
Okay,
children.
we're going to have, you know, we can do proselytizing for your belief later. This is about question and answer, so respect. If you're not going to...
I'm questioning...
what's your question? Go ahead.
I'm questioning, if you've never had a life in Ramtha's School of Enlightenment, what gives you validity to speak to people leaving a life of Ramtha School? You've never had a life. You've never been a student. You've never been involved in the Ramtha School. So how can you speak on creating a life out of RSC School when you've never been in it?
Well, the question is, you know, if you haven't experienced it, how can you criticize it? You know, if you haven't eaten chocolate ice cream, how can you say what it is? You know, that's an old Hare Krishna thing. You know, until you've been bit by a snake, how do you know what it feels like to be poisoned? You know, until you've drank 5 quarts of whiskey, how do you know what it's like to die from drinking 5 quarts of whiskey? You know, how do you know? You wouldn't know. How would you criticize that? You know, do you have a right to criticize someone that's ready to do that? Okay, so you can ask that question in different ways. You know, and going back to this whole thing about getting rapport with people and what is Ramtha, and of course Ramtha by its self-definition is part of the Great White Brotherhood. So by that, it's one of the wines among many wines out there. The Great White Brotherhood is a huge conglomerate of organizations and teachings and whatever that came long before JZ Knight was born. Okay, at least 100 years, if not 400. So you know, I've tasted a lot of wines. You know, do I have to taste every wine in the world to know what another wine is going to taste like and feel like and how it feels to get drunk on it? No.
Excuse me, I think if you're coming here to talk about
No, let me finish.
the school, I think you need to experience what you're actually taking.
I'm answering her question, which is the same thing you're talking about. So the situation is when you recognize the effects of wine, no matter what label you put on it, Ramtha, Elizabeth Clare Prophet, Agni Yoga, Madame Blavatsky, you know you're getting into the same type of thing. Okay, it might be a little different flavor, it might be a little different type of party going on, there might be more or less ingestion of the substance, but you're essentially going into the same territory. And so when you ask, you know, have you experienced it? Yes, I've drank wine. You know, that variety of wine? No. Maybe I'm not interested in it, but I know enough about it. The other answer to that is that we human beings become wise not because we experience everything for ourselves, but because we learn through vicarious experience. You know, our wives teach us what it means to have childbirth. As a man, I don't have that experience, but I can appreciate it. I can help to support it. You know, I can help to do a lot of things that are involved in that experience that only a woman can really have. All right, so does that make me a lesser person? Does that make me someone that can't understand it? No. You know, I can identify with pain. I know what pain is. That's pain, you know, when you go through childbirth. So that experience I can have. We can share that. You know, and the same thing, you know, with the Ramtha group, C&E, the breathing technique. I used to do that pranayama in a different group. The effects of oxygenation of the blood are the same, no matter what you name it. So yeah, I've experienced that. You know, hyperventilation, the effects are the same. You know, there isn't really any physiological difference. You may interpret it differently, sure, but the experience is the same. You know, sitting out in Paradise Beach. I mean, I've camped out in mountains by myself and not having food and thunder and lightning and that kind of thing in the New Mexico Sangre de Cristo. Many times I've been up there, you know, and you know, a couple times sort of lost, but finding my way later. you know, I can compare that experience a little bit to what groups, you know, do in their wilderness experiences or Paradise Beach. There's similarities there. So yes, I've had that experience to some degree. I can relate to it. So, you know, so the answer isn't that simple. It's not about joining a group for 10 years and you know, I mean, how long do you have to be in a group before you can say you legitimately can criticize it? 1 year, 6 months, 10 years, the rest of your life? I mean, you know, do you have to be JZ Knight? Do you have to be the guru herself before you can criticize it? How deep does your experience have to be before you can say anything about it? You know, so, you know, I could say to you, how do you know it's really Ramtha unless you are channeling Ramtha? How would you know?
How do you know that Pope is the emblem of God? I mean, how do we get you out of Catholicism, for Christ's sake?
I'm not even going to answer that one.
Hi, Joe, I have a very simple question for you.
Yeah.
With all
Could you identify whether you're a current member or moving on?
I believe I left the school in 2001 and I went back for a catch-up, I don't know, about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
So,
are you currently a believer and a supporter of Ramtha or not?
it's been the greatest experience of my life.
Okay, go ahead. Answer your question. I just want to know.
I would just simply like to know, Joe, what do you believe in?
Could you speak up, please?
She's asking, what do I believe in? I thought I answered it earlier, but were you here earlier?
Mm-hmm. Okay. But I didn't hear you answer it. I'd like to know personally, you personally, with all of your experiences in life.
Well, I already identified myself as a Roman Catholic. I mean, I don't know.
No, but what does that mean to you? What do you believe in?
You mean in terms of my personal, quiet, private moments with God?
Sure, that's good.
Well, I have personal, private, quiet moments with what I believe God is. I have them, yeah. And I follow the general principles of Catholicism. You know, I believe in the mystery of the Eucharist.
So you do have belief systems that guide your life for yourself personally.
I know there's there's limits to all that. I mean, that's not a mystery to me. I'm not saying that God in his workshop, you know, worked up a religion and said Catholicism is the main truth to follow. I mean, I'm not saying that.
Have you ever felt victimized in your belief systems through outer experiences, maybe people or organizations, that you have felt victimized and therefore angry at all?
Angry at what?
Well, there's a lot of people here today that have felt victimized and have been angry, like David, that he gave up his wife and children for a period of time in which he thought he was following a spiritual path.
I was following a spiritual path, and would you let me speak for myself? Speak for yourself.
No, but I've just from reading in the paper.
Well, still speak for yourself.
You
I
gave
have an
your opinion
opportunity.
to the
Right,
world
and
in the paper,
right. So that's all of it.
So go ahead, ask me the question. Go ahead, finish
Okay.
it.
So anyway, so following a spiritual path within you, and a lot of things can be interpreted in lots of ways, but the interpretation, personally, I think, should be the strongest interpretation.
You mean
your
self-interpretation?
You see, I didn't have these victimizations. I didn't leave my family. I didn't have any of that stuff when I came to the school. So therefore, I didn't come fractured. And the school enhanced my life. It was something that really did wonderful things for me, just in simple common sense teachings. So that's why I was asking you, what do you believe in, and if you've ever been
Notice
victimized.
a lot of your hand movements come from the school, but go ahead.
Well, I'm a public speaker too. Okay?
Yeah.
So I've done a lot of that
Right.
in my life, so that's a natural.
Yeah, but those are specific to Mafu and Ramtha. I can see that.
Well, I don't know Mafu. I don't know.
Right.
I'm a pretty simple
I mean,
girl.
every group has its identifying characteristics, you know. Just,
So anyway, I just
neither
wanted
good
to
nor
know
bad,
if
but,
you've
yeah.
ever felt in your life victimized or traumatized or, you know, bad feelings or anything like
Well,
that.
I already spoke to that earlier. If you listened, I mean, I said when I left the Church Universal and that system of in my anger to self.
Okay, I'm not hearing that before.
Okay.
I'm one of those people that has never been pissed off about it.
So, Joe, do you know, for instance, some of the sources, like you pointed out, Madam Blavatsky.
Yes.
Had other sources. Do you have knowledge of some of the sources of the Ramtha material?
Well, you know, I mean, JZ Knight, to her credit, is creative to some degree, and she has come up with some unique stuff, you know, so like every group does. But there's also borrowings. I mean, you know, some people have, former members of, you know, I showed me this book yesterday. This is a very obscure book in the channeling world, but this lady wrote her autobiography, Vera Stanley Adler, called From the Mundane to the Magnificent. There's a lot of concepts in here that very much parallel exactly what JZ said she went through. But this experience happened before 1943, where a being met her, took her into other worlds, showed her what the reality of a cell and an atom is, showed her the truth, and, you know, a lot of parallels in this. But then when I was reading this book, I'm thinking, you know, well, 1894, Daniel Garber's Brother of the Third Degree. Bulwer Lytton's novel, the Rosicrucian novel he wrote back in around the 1850s, I think, Sir Edward Bulwer Lytton, called, I can't remember the title, but it was a Rosicrucian-based novel that he claimed was a true story, but it really was all fiction. It was all made up. It's
Zanoni.
What's that?
Zanoni?
Yes, Jim Zanoni. That was one book that inspired Blavatsky, one of her favorite books, and but it was written what Plato would call a pious fraud, meaning he meant to teach something about Rosicrucianism by claiming that, you know, it's a writer's trick to claim that the experiences are true when in fact they're making them up. Carlos Castaneda was a famous one for writing pious frauds. There was never a Don Juan, and that's well known. And I kind of know from the inside, from exit counseling people that were in his inner core group, how he wrote those books. But a lot of people think it was real, that there was really a Don Juan, that Carlos Castaneda really met this shaman.
Joe,
you know, but he was never existent. Yes.
Joe, I would like to see us not expend our energy in putting you on the defensive.
I don't mind that.
What I would like to see, though, personally for myself, is this is about life after Ramtha. And can I just say a couple of things along that line? I want to take it out of the arena of argument and maybe elevate it to another plane. Siddhartha is someone who comes to my mind. I've never forgotten his statement in the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, when the Buddha and his disciples are coming through the forest, and the Buddha sees Siddhartha and sees he would make a good disciple, and he says to him to come and follow me. And Siddhartha looks him in the eye and he says, "Oh, you are a great, great master. You sat under the Bo tree and you found enlightenment. I need to find my own Bo tree." This has been a guiding measuring stick for me. Also, Shakespeare comes to mind when he says, in essence, what he's saying is, nature is my teacher, life is my teacher. I go to the babbling brook, I find sermons in stones, and in the babbling brook. The interest here, I think, should be about truth. My interest is in truth and not in being right or being wrong, because truth will unerringly guide me to where I need to be. And another Shakespeare quote I would like to say right now is another guidepost for me in my life, and that is, "To thine own self be true." If anyone is struggling in should I leave, should I not leave, what have I gotten from it, what will happen to me when I leave, you can never go wrong if you are true to your own self. But that means that you have to take a step into fear, and you have to take a step into freedom. Because though we talk about freedom, very few people really want freedom.
Could I stop you a second? Okay.
Sure.
You're doing something that drives people nuts in recovery groups right now. And I'm going to use, I'm not criticizing, I mean it's a criticism, but it's one that's a lesson here.
That's
because
okay.
What happens is, when people start absorbing themselves in their own direction of thought, they go into a kind of trance talking. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But it sounds dictatorial to other people. You know, like, this is what Shakespeare said and all of that. in recovery groups and ex-members, and I've been in a lot of them over the years, they want, they don't mind hearing other people's stories about their pain and their recovery issues and all of that. They don't want to be told how to think. That triggers them, because that's what their group taught, like it was a one-down situation. Mama or Papa telling me how to think, the guru, the God, telling me, and they don't want to hear that anymore in a recovery group. What they
I thought I was saying just the opposite, Joe, in the sense
I know what you're trying to say, but I'm telling you how I'm hearing it.
I apologize to anyone if that's the way it came across. Yeah. I don't mean that, and I'll make my amends right now. In saying to thine own self be true, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying don't let anybody do your thinking for you. Go within and feel what's right for you. Think what's right for you. Don't go into no thing. And I see a lot of people going into no thing. Ramtha said, well, okay, Ramtha said, other people say other things. Be eclectics. Take a little bit, like Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and make your own stew. That's your own truth.
Okay. All right, thanks. Yes, sir, go ahead with the flag on there.
Yeah, I just wanted a question about what your role here. When someone calls you for an event like this, is when you're going into it, is your perspective as a neutral person coming in?
I'm not neutral.
You're not neutral?
No.
Okay, so you come in with...
I'm a critic.
You come in as a critic.
I come as a critic, yeah.
And you said yourself that some people look like, you said you're Roman Catholic. And that some people...
That has nothing to do with what I'm talking about.
No, I know.
My personal faith.
Yeah, I know that. And you said yourself that some people view that as the biggest cult there is.
Sure.
But that's just...
The Whore of Babylon, the Vatican.
Sure.
Right.
So I was wondering if you don't view yourself as somebody neutral coming in to assess the situation and then deal with the people that you're dealing with, where do you draw your personal boundaries as far as, like, are you viewing the RSC as something that's definitely wrong and that is something that these people need to be helped out of? So I was wondering where you draw that personal boundary. If you have a personal set of beliefs that you obviously have on your own personal time.
Right.
Because my perception coming here was that you were a neutral individual that like, okay, I'm going to assess this situation. And
no, I'm here to help people in the recovery after they leave. I mean, I'm not going to be, if I'm neutral, I'd have to be wishy-washy about the whole topic, and I'm not. I'm very specific about it. For instance, I'll state that I don't believe there is any validity to the channeling phenomenon from Rosicrucian on. There's no one that is attached to an independent spirit.
Right.
It's dependent on their own personality. And I come to believe this and to know this in a certain way by testing channelers while they're in the mode of the being, several of them that had some success, and being able to demonstrate even to them that they're not separate, that there's a they can't prove, in other words, that the being is, or the entity separate from them. All right, so that's my personal belief, one that I've looked at, and I'll share that with people. Now, obviously, that goes totally against the grain of the RSE, because the belief there is Ramtha is independent, is truly a 35,000-year-old spirit, and has a lot of power to affect things on the face of this earth. I won't go there. That's not how I see it.
So your personal beliefs on these topics definitely influences your mode of relaying this information to people then.
Well, yeah, I'm going to, in some cases, people, we influence one another all the time. It's a matter of the quality of influence. And what I'm hoping is that the quality of the information I give is valuable enough for them to carry it further and grow with it. They can reject it, obviously.
The distinction that's tough for me is it almost seems like you're an exit counselor with an agenda. Meaning that you're going to use your techniques to try and counsel people, but those techniques are influenced by your own personal beliefs, which doesn't make you really an independent advocate.
I'm not neutral.
Right.
I mean, I can play the neutral role, I've conducted debates often. Is, you know, we used to do this in Santa Fe between disparate groups, you know, like Wiccans, witches, and fundamentalist Christians. I mean, talk about two different groups. At the end, they're in a circle, talking to one another and giving up a prayer. You know, yeah, I can play the neutral role. You know, I don't believe in fundamentalism. I don't believe in Wicca. You know, but I understand both of them.
Right.
Okay, so understanding it doesn't mean I agree with it. You know, so I'm in disagreement, maybe with RSE about a lot of it. Maybe some of it I'm not so not so concerned about. But that doesn't mean that I can't understand it because I'm in disagreement with it. Okay,
right.
And so I share my disagreements and my understanding both.
Right. I was just
Both.
saying it's
Right.
tough sometimes to listen to somebody objectively and think they're trying to help you when you know that their own personal beliefs are definitely forcing them into a certain direction.
Well, you know, as much as I try, and any scholar tries in academia, you know, and I'm not saying I'm a scholar, but I know a lot of them, and you know, and I refer to their works. They all have to admit that personal bias influences what they write. As much as they try to erase it, you just can't get rid of it. I mean, it's part of being human.
Right.
And I'm not, you know, I get, my wife catches me in my personal biases.
Right.
So
your exit counseling is just specifically is for what you consider fringe groups, like you don't exit counsel anybody that wants to get out of Catholicism, right?
There are Catholic organizations which are quite bizarre and controlling, like Caritas in the South, and there was one. I mean, there's a lot of them.
Right, but just
my cousin was a monk in a lay monastery in New England, and he came out of it after a year totally devastated. It was a cult within the Catholic Church. The bishop wasn't overseeing it properly. You know, and I helped him with that stuff. You know,
but
it's in my backyard.
General overall Catholicism, you wouldn't deal with.
It's not so much the type of group it is, whether it's a fringe group or not. It's really a parameter of behaviors that define whether it's potentially harmful or not. And those, you know, it can go over the behaviors. I mean, Arthur Dykman is one author that wrote a book, Us and Them, and he has 4 criteria. Margaret Singer has 16. Robert Lifton, in defining totalism, has 8 themes. I mean, there's different ways to approach what constitutes a harmful system. That's what I'm trying to concentrate on. It's not about whether it's a fringe group or not, because a harmful system can coalesce and exist within a larger group. And a larger group can form into a harmful system if these behaviors begin to take place.
It's interesting,
you know,
because
so it's the behaviors really that I'm looking at.
Right. Well, the history of, not to just pick specifically on Catholicism, but the history of Catholicism is fairly bloody. So to look at you know, if you're looking at a system that's
Look, you're looking at a historian. I've read all of that.
Well, I mean,
and
I've
discussed it with priests. I'm aware of it. As much as I'm aware of Church Universal and Triumphant or whatever.
Sure.
It's my faith. You know, I know it's got a bloody history. I know it's got, you know, it's a huge target. I mean, you could blindfold yourself and shoot into it, and you're going to find a place where something's wrong. It's big. It's been around a long time. The same thing with the Hindu faith.
Right.
I mean, it's a myriad religion with 60,000 gods and goddesses. I mean, it's, you know, you're going to find something there that's wrong.
Yeah.
You know, the Brahmins have gone through phases of horrible treatment of people in their history. I mean, it's one of the reasons why the reform of Buddhism took off so quickly in India, because the Brahmins were misusing their power in you know, 1800 years ago. And the Brahmins reformed, and things got a little better. You know, so I mean, the major religions that go through this stuff, it's human history.
Right.
We're fallible, we're flawed, we coalesce into cults constantly. And I'm not just saying cults, but harmful totalist organizations, whether they're small or large. I mean, this is what I, you know, I mean, if you want to study it from that point of view, you can, but it has to do with behavior, with relationship, not so much with belief. It's not about the beliefs where the harm comes. The harm doesn't come from beliefs. I mean, I can believe this, you know, rock is my God. It might not please a lot of people, but if I kick it hard enough, I'm going to hurt my foot, whether I believe it hurts me or not. You know, so you know, beliefs. It's not about the beliefs; it's about the behavior. Okay.
Right. So that's what the premise of my whole beginning of the question was the difficulty in listening to someone helping us out of a situation, supposedly, when they come from a situation that is, you know, your belief system, which does have that harmful background to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm honest about it.
Sure.
I'm not trying to hide that, but I don't convert people to it. I'm not a witness. I don't evangelize. Okay? Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I have one question. Is it Joe?
Yes.
You said you tasted many different wines and you've been to different and educated yourself. Were you originally a Catholic? Were you brought up in the Catholic faith?
Yeah, my parents are Hungarian. I was born into it. Most Hungarians are Catholic, or they were back then.
Well, that says a lot to me. I don't know how much education you got if you're still originating from the one you were indoctrinated in as a child and you're still participating in it. I don't think you'd have much that I would want to take from you because you haven't really changed.
So you're passing judgment on me based on the fact that I've been a Catholic all my life?
Yeah, you bet.
Okay. I haven't been, well, see now.
That says a lot to me.
See now, this is where rapport is necessary when you're having a conversation with someone, because I haven't been a Catholic all my life and you don't know that, do you?
I asked you what you were educated in as a child.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
I went through Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, and a Catholic college.
Yeah.
University of Dayton.
So your education hasn't taken you much from your roots.
You're not listening. I lapsed. I was not a Catholic, not a practicing Catholic, not a believing Catholic from age 19 until after I got married the second time, and my second wife, who had no religion growing up, converted to Catholicism on her own, and I decided to re-enter the church.
Okay,
why she did that is a whole other story, but you know, yeah, I've been away from the church for 19 years in one stretch.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yes.
I think you've been really straightforward on where you're coming from. My question is, and he touched on it, what behavioral things do you look for? What are the things that you're trying to correct in these people? What is it that you said it's the behavior, not the cult or the belief? So what do you focus on in the behavior?
Okay, well, let me give you Dykman's, which is the briefest model that I use. Martha Dykman identified cult behavior specifically as compliance with a group, dependence on a leader, avoiding dissent, and devaluing outsiders. Okay, to the extent that those things become more important and extreme in the behavior of any group or organization, you have what he called destructive cult behavior. All right, so when you become overly compliant with a group to the exclusion of other kinds of information, and you become overly dependent on a leader, even though you say you're not, your behavior says you are. You know, in other words, the leader says, you know, Prozac is a way to enlightenment, and suddenly everybody's taking Prozac. The behavior says you are, okay? Devaluing outsiders. We are the elite. This is the quickest way to enlightenment. No one else has this great path.
The chosen people.
Yeah, we are, yeah, whatever, but you begin to devalue outsiders. To the extent you do that more, the more harmful the system can get. Avoiding dissent, that goes two ways. You don't like it when people like me, who's an outsider, criticize you and your group, and you don't want to listen to them. Okay, so you avoid it. You don't want to interact with that. But
in an ocean